Yeah, we're doing this. Warhammer Fantasy Battles, 6th edition, in all of its mostly black and white, but also color glory. A lot of things have changed, here on the channel, here in my life, that have led me to this end where I'm actually playing one of the, well, it used to be one of the flagship games of the board collective that we refer to here on the channel as G-Dubs. And we're going to talk about this game in particular, do a little bit of a mini review, but we got to talk about a few other things first. What has led me to this impasse? Well, the first thing to be aware of is that this is kind of an old school game. They don't call it Old Hammer for nothing. This particular version of the game was published around about the turn of the century, about 2000, 2002, somewhere around there. But it traces its lineage all the way back to the OG first Warhammer Fantasy Battles. A lot of significant changes, but the structural framework remained the same. And oddly enough, this game published within the last 20 years is going to help us understand the history of miniature wargaming as a whole. We'll get to that a little bit. I want to talk about why I decided to start dipping my toes into the WFB waters. And I guess the first thing to point out is that we've been playing some old school Necromunda for back 19, talk about old, right? 1994, I think that game came out. And it was a breath of fresh air to play a game that was I go, you go. That chess game where you play one side and then you get to flip the table around as a solo wargamer and play the other side, rather than constantly trying to turn your hat around and alternating activation and all these like slick new modern ways of wargaming that they're fine, they're enjoyable, but I think a lot of people look down their noses on the I go, you go system, and I think that's doing a game like this a disservice. Maybe not so much in 40K, where that first initiative roll, because you can reach out and touch your enemy right out of the gate, that first initiative roll makes a huge difference. But in a game like this, where there is still that turn or two of jockeying for position, and I'll say this, the setup, the deployment is alternating by unit, so there is that little mini game on alternating at the start of the game. But once you get rolling, it's a very efficient way to wargame, and I really appreciate that. And I discovered that by playing old school Necromunda. Now, there's another factor involved in my decision to pick this game up, and that is this game right here. I have been enjoying the heck out of one-page regiments, but every time I play this game, I feel like there's something missing. There's something I don't really get about it. And specifically, I can give you one for instance. This game, and there's no secret, that this game is heavily influenced by and inspired by this game. Now, One Page Rules does offer you, and this is a great game, I'm not turning my back on this game completely, it does offer you the one-page rule set where everything you need to play the game is right here, bang, bang. And if you are an experienced wargamer, then this is all you need. You can figure out how to play the game just from this and grabbing a couple of army lists, throwing some armies together. If you want a little bit more, then it does offer you, and each of the titles in the Age of Fantasy, the one-page rules system, offers you this, what are they calling it? It's really, they've got it down to about 16 pages of text that will give you a more detailed version of the rules. But even at 16 pages, I always feel like I'm missing out on something. There's a few elements that I just can't quite, internalize. And one of those is how you use character models and individual models. Maybe there's a sentence or two buried in here, but I don't know. Just for my money's worth, I've never really felt comfortable about putting heroes and champions into a full-bore rank and flank regiment that looks a little something like this. How do you deal with that? And I could do it by iteration. I could figure it out. But I thought, why would I do that? Why don't we turn our attention back here? And another reason for picking up this book here was the fact that it cost me $10, and that includes delivery. Granted, I'm an American. I live in the United States. It was shipped to me from, I can't even remember now. Abe Books is where I got it. So the title itself was like $5 shipping. Wow, why wouldn't I do that? Well, the other reason to pick up this book, so I recommend, poke around. You can find this, it's in really good shape. I mean, it's been thumbed through a little bit, but it ain't bad, brother. Poke around. If you're interested in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, this goes for dirt cheap. Ironically enough, the army lists that you need, and this is called 15, this is Ravening Hordes. This is 15 get-you-by lists for Warhammer, the game of Fantasy Battles. get you by. You can buy, and it has, like it says right there on the tin, 15 get you by lists, and it gives you individual rules, and it walks you through the whole process of how to build an army list. This will get you by for a good long while. We'll talk a little bit more about why these two books will get you by for a good long while. There's incredible value here. Although, again, hey, this is only $10. Well, this cost me like $30 altogether. So, but still, I mean, $40 for this full game. Now, if you want to pick up the Army lists and the Army books, they give you a whole lot more information and details and rules that, let's be honest, as a solo wargamer, I'm kind of thinking the Army list rule books are maybe a bridge too far, right? These are very complex rule sets. The Army lists are very complicated, and the rule set itself isn't really all that complicated, despite the hefty weight of the tome. I mean, this sucker is, what are we looking at here? We're looking at almost 300 pages of gooey gaming goodness. So I think this is a really good value, particularly if you've already got the figures that you're going to play this. And spoiler alert, I'm going to be playing this with the same figures that I use for Age of Fantasy Regiments. Yeah, we're going to play this in 15 millimeter. I'm going to use Splintered Light. This is a 20-year-old rule book. We'll see how long before G-Dubs gets mad that I'm doing it wrong because I'm not using their IP. Now, at this point, I do want to take just a moment to point out, I don't know which one of these guys is Tuomas, but I have posted a couple little, fired off a couple of tweets. And Tuomas is active over on Twitter, and if you poke around, you can find him. And it's been really delightful and gratifying to hear from him as he explains things that, honestly, some of this stuff is really obvious. Like, I really want to draw attention. But before we close the books on that, it's been really fun sharing my thoughts. Now that I know the guy that wrote this, and we'll go right to the. And this is probably my favorite page in the book for some interesting reasons. It's by Rick Priestley and Tuomas Pirinen, I guess you pronounce that. Of course, Rick Priestley, we all know he's the guy. I think he's with Warlord Games now, and he built the original gaming engine. But Tuomas, it's spelled T-U-O. Is that Thomas? I'm saying Tuomas because it looks like a Iberian name, right? Did it actually export Portuguese? Maybe. Portuguese is how we say Portuguese in Hawaii. Because of the Portuguese accent. Anyway, the point is, in fact, when you here's a funny story, just a little local flavor for you. When you go to McDonald's and you order your big breakfast, you can choose between sausage, and they also have Portuguese sausage on the menu. Anyway, Thomas, it's been great getting to meet him, however you pronounce his name, and I actually took a picture of this page because I absolutely adore, look at the and you might say, wait, the credits page is your favorite? But look at this artwork. I absolutely love this artwork. It is kind of like that famous Bayo tapestry, I guess you could say. Here's old Sigmar himself. Wait, is that Sigmar? He's saying Sigmar U Nova. I can't quite read that. But look at this. You get the little dwarfy guys, and I may have to adjust the lighting on this one a little bit. Let's bring that over so you can see it a little better, huh? I just think that's great. That is so much fun. And then you see the rest of the art. It's kind of like John Blanche. Lots of good photos, I think. But I mean, it's fine, I guess. People really seem to like this, like, gross, slick, overproduced. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of John Blanche's art. I just think it's gross. And there's enough ugliness in the world. We don't need to add to it. I prefer things that are beauty. And something like this charming kind of. There's a pile of skulls here, a pile of orc skulls. But it's all very abstract, and it's very in keeping with the semi-medieval. Now we all, but by this time we all know Warhammer kind of does that mishmash of eras where you can see who are the guys in the big flouncy shirts? Your Landsknechts going up against Dark Age guys going up against French medieval knights. So that's all fine. But that's kind of just the introduction of me and my way of getting into this game. Hopefully, by playing some games of this, we'll be able to better understand this, and maybe by taking a look at this kind of the most recent new school take on an old school style of gaming, maybe we can learn a couple of things about the hobby, just generally speaking, if the IP lawyers don't come after us. So let's take a look now at the game, and I'm going to treat this as just kind of a rough overview for those of you that are not aware of how the game works. It's very heavily invested in army lists. Cabal, they got this, they got a whole book of 15 of them in a separate book. And a big part of the 278 pages is geared around selling the models. That's fine. Rick Priestley's got to eat too. The guys, the stock investors got to make their money too. But the core of the game is an I go, you go system, which I think will work out great for those of us that war game solo-wise, right? Because once you do your deployment, which is you deploy your unit, I deploy a unit, then we can do, hey, you know what? I'm going to move this entire side. We'll do the 4 M's, movement, melee, missile, magic, not necessarily in that order. We'll look at that in a second. And then I can, just like the chessboard, flip it around and say, okay, now I'm going to treat these guys and I can do my 4 M's and it'll be fine. The basic game is let's look at our 4 M's. Here we go. We've got movement, magic, missile, and melee in that order. And one of the things I really like about this, okay, so step 1 is start of the turn where you do specific things like certain tests, psychological stuff, or maybe specific rules, but for the scenario. But for the bulk of it, it's you're going to do your moving, and then you're going to do magic, and then you're going to do your shooting, and then you're going to do your melee. And one thing that I really like, and I've committed to reading this entire book, every page, I don't want to miss out on anything. I will point out, this is not my first trip to the Warhammer Fantasy Battles Rodeo. One of the first war games that I ever got was the box set. I think it's 2nd edition with the goblins and the elves. Painted the whole thing up and then traded all of those figures for a bunch of dual lands in Magic the Gathering. And then, I don't know, I gave him to a guy to sell for me, and he graduated from college and I never saw him again. Oh, man, talk about the ones that got away. One of the things I really appreciate about this book, and I'm not going to do the whole flip through, but it starts out with a lot of really basic stuff for the 12-year-olds out there who have never miniature war game. It shows pictures of guys playing, right? Here's the Priestleys, as usual, right? Very big. They were still at the time, I believe they were still employed by or only recently departed from Games Workshop when this came out, right? Oh, it's a little tournament, right? The more things change, there's a Games Workshop. How about that? And then we got a bunch of really good pictures. Now, I will say this, I really like this era of Games Workshop. I like the painting style for the figures, just as by way of another little mini rant. A lot of the guys on YouTube that are all about the painting, in fact, I saw a short where the guy said, hey, when you paint your miniature wargame figures, this is very old and very staid, and he was kind of sneering at this without actually doing so. He didn't really fully commit to this style of painting. Or I should say, he didn't fully commit to denigrating the heavy metal style. Is it heavy metal without the H? And his thesis was that the problem with these models is that they're all painted from a very septic point of view, that the lighting is very neutral, and as a result, you get no sense of the model in its environment. To which I can only respond, what environment are you talking about, brother? I got 4 different environment battle maps. I've got an urban landscape, woods, desert, and broken lands. If I paint this model so that it fits into the environment, it's going to look even worse than the other 3. This neutral, bright, maybe somewhat gaudy painting style works for miniature wargaming. If you're only a collector and painter, that's fine. You're only doing half the hobby. That's great. You're a half hobbyist. But don't come into my hobby and tell me that I need to paint for the environment when I don't even know what the environment is. It shows a very limited amount of creativity and a myopic view of what these miniatures are. I'm done with this little mini rant. I just thought I'd point it out. I like the painting style here. It's achievable by your average wargamer within a year or 2, and of course they include little advice. This kind of table setup is very inspiring. Look at these. They're not really Polish knights. I mean, who does not want to collect a table that looks like this? It's really good. It's really simple. This is achievable. It's wonderful. Then we get into the rules, and here's something I really like. This is something that a lot of books could really use. When you come across a situation that is not covered by the rule book, let me read that again, because like a lot of tabletop RPG guys miss this part. Come up with a suitable rule for yourselves. Like most of the role-playing game guys, here's another mini rant for you. They just read this part. Come up with a suitable rule. Well, but if you really want to play this game, then they tell you right here in black and white. Look, we don't cover everything. Use the rules until you run out of them. You run out of road, and then you got to start charting your own course. I really like that. I really think that's important to include in more rule books. Of course, we may play a little bit fast and loose with a couple of rules because, again, we're solo wargamers. We'll have to improvise ways to achieve the same effects. Movement, all this stuff is really good, and I really like the way these rules are laid out. Now, it is these days there is a focus in certain quarters for hyper-efficient rule sets. And let me just spare you the indignity of watching me flip through a little bit more. Let's take a look at the rules themselves. Here we are on page, what is it, about 36, and then we get all the way to page 85. So the rules themselves are in, let's see, 36, 40, that's 9, it's about 50 pages long. Compare that to the 16 pages of Age of Resonance. 60 pages is an awful lot of text. Yeah, granted, there's a lot of this, the text boxes here, the flavor text, if you will, and I got to be honest with you, the flavor text all leaves me cold. It's really not great. Like, there's a reason at the time that flavor text had a really bad reputation as filler, and this, I just not great. So this is not a gushing and glowing review. However, as I was saying, you've got 50 pages worth of rules here, but they really take your time. And I have this page flagged for I have this page where I had a page flagged and I can't find it. Okay, bit of an awkward edit. It wasn't where I thought it was. Flank and rear charges. And this is what I wanted to mention specifically about this rule set. It gives you concrete rules, and then it gives you design notes right there in the rules. And it typically does that in that order, making this book one of those rare cases where you've got the rules that you need close at hand, and then you've got explanations that don't just help you learn the rules, they help you internalize them by really explaining them. It's also design notes right there. And it even gets to the point where it's talking about, and this is the section I want to read specifically, flank and rear charges. Being charged from a direction you cannot see and thought was safe is a frightening thing even for the bravest of troops. With his field of vision narrowed by his position in the ranks, the average soldier has only a limited knowledge of what is happening on the battlefield. If the enemy has somehow got round behind him, he might reasonably assume that the battle is lost. Doubt will be sown in his mind, and he may become disoriented and confused. His fighting efficiency may even become impaired. If he is fighting in close combat, he might panic and flee. So I really like this because it really helps reinforce what it is that we are modeling here. So much of what we do here exists in kind of a quantum state where we've got a block of troops that is right here on the table. And they're going to move a certain distance. And we've got kind of an idea that they're not moving across a flat bowling green. There's all kind. They mention that in the rules here. Look, your guys that break are going to move 2d6 inches. They can move anywhere from 2 to 12 inches. Why? Maybe there's a ravine behind them that suddenly becomes very critical when you're moving, as a mob of troops instead of a close ordered and well-ordered unit of troops. They talk about the fact that, when you pull casualties off, just pull them from the back rank. We're going to assume that the front rank moves in. The individual figures that you have, and they don't list an actual ratio here. I mean, if we go with 10 to 1, that's probably a pretty good ratio for large war bands. Anytime a figure dies, in the front rank, the back rank is going to step up. So, it's that kind of thing where we say, look, we understand that we're kind of hovering on the edge of actual physical representation and kind of just the general representation of what's going on. I don't know how to explain that very well, but I think you get my meaning, that a lot of what we're doing is simplifying the process down. And by providing these design notes right here and now, not only does it reinforce, here's what you should be thinking about as you're running down this process, it explains why the model works the way it does. And I just think that's wonderful because so much of these games are, what do you think is going to happen when your unit is charged in the flank by another unit? Well, that's pretty much exactly what is going to happen. So there is a little bit of modeling here. And I do think that the breakdown of the rules into basic rules and the advanced rules section is a positive thing. Thomas and Rick give you we're on a first name basis now, me and Thomas, even though I don't know his first name, we're on because, I say nice things about this, and he explains them to me, which is great. But we don't need to know all of the details of War Machines here in the basic section. These are the basic how you play the rules, and I really like that. Then they go into, so that's kind of the general overview of the game. And specifically, when we get down into the turn sequence, there's some really interesting things going on here. You start out by declaring your charges. Before you actually move any figures, there's a few things that need to happen. And the game walks you through why it works that way. First, the charge reactions happen. When do the shooters fire? Do they shoot as soon as the charge is declared? Well, not necessarily. If the chargers are out of range, you got guys with a firing range of 4 inches, and they're being charged by a unit that is 8 inches away. Then you move the charging unit to 4 inches. Then you make the fire. Then you make that 2-hit roll. And then the survivors close. Or if the guys being charged decide to break ranks and run away, that's a valid tactic. You could do that. And I'm wondering how well this will work with things like feigned retreats. If I decide to run away from the charging guys who may be frenzied and have to follow up, maybe I can lure knights into bad ground, right? That's a historical tactic. And I'm going to be looking to see how well this game reflects those kind of realistic historical tactics, at least until we get our feet under us. So, then we get, and again, a little more detail on characters, and we do have a whole lot of background of the world of Warhammer. That's a pretty good chunk of the book, and I'll read through that all. But here's the other thing. Here's the other reason I got this book. Now, here's why I recommend this book for you if you have Age of Fantasy, Regiment specifically, because that's the one I played, but if you have the Warband or the Skirmish version, this might help. You've got 9 scenarios in this book, and Regiments is all about capturing objective points. Now, I know that there are specific one-page rule books out there that include additional rules for scenarios, and I know you've got these scenario cards. What do they call them in this? Mission cards. But most of these are all about securing, particular objectives. I wanted to start playing around with rank and flank games that have fights that are much more. All right, so the first couple are just variations on stand-up battles, but you've got season objective with reinforcements coming in. You've got we got a defender and a deployment. We've got last stands. We've got outnumbered troops. 9 scenarios gives me a whole lot more flexibility, and maybe after playing a number of these scenarios, I can go ahead and retreat back to Age of Fantasy with a much better understanding. It looks to me like this is a much more streamlined version of this game, but that, there's value in both, and I guess I recommend them both, although it's hard to recommend a game that you haven't played. Old school terrain with the battlefields, and then I guess this is turning into kind of a flip through. Now, once again, I am going to have to, let me see if I got it. Here we go. So this is your 3-inch small template. I'm going to reduce that in size. I've got my boom boom, and then I've got a large template. It's supposed to be 5 inches across. I think this is probably closer to 3. Meh. My game might be a little OP or UP underpowered, depending. And then look at that glossary, and we don't have an index, which is a bit of a wash. Kind of a complicated roster here. I haven't looked at magic in any detail. I want to get my, I want to ease myself. I want to boil that frog slowly. So we'll probably start off with a couple of smaller fights. And then again, the Ravening Hordes is kind of important because I have a total of 4 armies that I can build using different army lists. I haven't quite figured out. I mean, I know the difference between the Empire and Bretonnia. I don't know if I have enough horses to do a Bretonian army, but I think between, and this doesn't have a table of contents, does it? Well, let's just go ahead and flip through real quick. I think I've got enough. Now, interestingly enough, I can do a goblin. Remember, all my goblins are mounted on wolves. I can do a reasonably sized army of wolf riders. My nomadic goblins. Now, I should point out, most of the armies that I can put together are going to be at about that 1,000-point limit, and I'm going to be struggling to get there. In fact, to get my goblins to 1,000 points, I'm going to have to throw a giant, that's a 200-point bro, into the mix. That's fine. I can put together an empire, particularly I now have a cannon, so that's kind of fun. The cannon hasn't seen the table yet. It definitely will. Of course, I got the Ratmen, the Skaven. They've been blooded a few times. As far as undead go, I don't know about this. I've got the Tomb Kings of Khemri, and then there is a Vampire Count's army. And I just recently, sorry for the wiggle there, I'm trying to grab a figure off the top of my, where'd he go? Oh, here he is. So I do have, so this is the more desert-esque with the skeletons, but we have a Vampire Count army. And yo, check it out. I actually have a Vampire Count. We're going to make some noise. We're going to bring him a little bit closer, change the light. Look, this is Count Von Tidy Whities. I'm not sure why he's wearing just white underpants. This comes to us by way of the Demon World line of miniatures, and man, they're so great. They have so much character, those figures. So my Vampire Count is going to be running around Tidy Whities. Maybe because he goes back and forth between bat form, gaseous form, and vampire form. I'm not entirely sure. The dwarves, I may throw a dwarf unit into the mix with my Bretonians, and then, of course, I don't have high elves. I got the dark elves, complete with, what do they call them? Cold Dark Riders. That's what these guys call them. These guys call them cold ones. These guys call them Dark Riders. I got enough for those. So Dark Elves are going to make an appearance on the table. And then, of course, Bretonnians. These are the ones I'm not sure. So I could probably put together about 6 different army lists. Most of them are going to clock in at about the 650 point range, which I think is good. Because remember, points are not a reflection of balance. Points, you set a scale of the points, and that tells you how long the game is going to last. Not interested in 3 to 4 hour games. I much prefer the more lunch hour kind of games. About an hour long. So if I scale back to 650 points, then you can forgive me because we'll get a game in a reasonable amount of time. These videos, we're already approaching about 30 minutes. We're almost at the end here. One last thing to point out is that when I throw my games together with about that 500 to 1,000 point range, I know that's a little small. But again, that's the scale that I'm operating at. And I'll be playing it in half scale. So my tabletop is 2 feet by 3 feet. Playing the game at half scale means I'm doing a 4 by 6 feet by 4 foot table, and you'll get the same effect. And you'll get it in that classic House of Wargaming style, right? We do the hands. This has a very good reputation among the old heads, among the grognards, and among the community in general. I actually looked around, watched a few videos, trying to get an idea for which of the many editions of Warhammer would be right for me. And up through 5, it looks like it's more Hero Hammer, and then it gets kind of bonkers from just I don't know, man. Like 7 through 9, I'm not sure about it. Nobody has anything bad to say about this game, except there's no army book for Chaos Dwarves. I don't own Chaos Dwarves anyway. It doesn't affect me. So that's kind of I think we're getting to the end here, guys. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for hanging out with me while I just went over some thoughts on Warhammer 6th edition and why I'm going back to this classic of the genre of the rank and flank, and why it won't be a full replacement for my one-page regiments, but why I think it might provide us with some fascinating insights into how we do what we do here in the greatest hobby in the world, miniature wargaming. Until next time, I'm praying for you.